The Vanishing Barista. Chapter 1, A Missing Face. Lena Carter was halfway through her usual oat milk latte when she realized something was wrong. The café, a cozy hole in the wall on East 9th, had been her morning ritual for 2 years. The baristas knew her name, her order, and even her habit of lingering at the corner table, scrolling through the latest conspiracy theories while pretending to work on her blog. But today, Sam was missing. Sam had been the closest thing Lena had to a friend in the real world, besides the online community of truth seekers who followed her blog. He wasn't just a barista, he was a constant presence, with his easy grin, sarcastic comments, and habit of drawing weird symbols in the foam of her latte.
"Where's Sam?"
Lena asked the girl behind the counter.
The new barista, someone she'd never seen before, offered a polite but confused smile.
"Sam?"
Yes, Sam. Tall, curly-haired, always wears that dumb alien pin on his apron.
The girl frowned. I just started this morning. I don't think there's anyone named Sam here.
Lena blinked.
"What, he worked here yesterday?"
The girl hesitated, exchanging a glance with her coworker. Then she turned back with a rehearsed kind of politeness.
Maybe you're thinking of another cafe?
Lena almost laughed. She came here every day. This wasn't a mistake. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through her photos. There, yesterday morning, Sam had been the one to hand her the drink. She even had a picture of the latte foam art he'd made, a tiny, lopsided UFO. She turned the screen toward the barista.
"That's him. This was literally yesterday."
The girl's face paled slightly. I don't know what to tell you.
Lena glanced toward the manager, a middle-aged man who had worked here as long as she could remember. She opened her mouth to call him over, but then stopped. His name tag read Tony. The manager's name was Greg.
"Where's Greg?"
Lena took a step back, her heartbeat quickening.
Tony looked up from where he was refilling the pastry case. Who?
Lena's stomach twisted. Something was very wrong. She turned and left the cafe without another word, but as she stepped outside, she hesitated. Her eyes flicked up toward the security camera mounted near the entrance. Sam had left work at 8:17 p.m. last night. Maybe she could find out what happened after that. Chapter 2, The Footage. Lena hesitated outside the cafe, her thoughts racing. Something about the way they had dismissed Sam, like he had never existed, made her skin crawl. She needed proof. Steeling herself, she stepped back inside. The new barista and Tony were busy serving the morning rush. If she was going to snoop, now was the time.
"Hey."
Lena said, walking up to the counter, forcing a smile.
"Sorry about earlier. I think I got mixed up, but actually I applied here a few weeks ago, and I was wondering if you still had my application on file."
The barista blinked. I'm not sure. I can ask the manager.
"That'd be great."
Lena said, keeping her voice light.
Tony looked up from the espresso machine when the barista called him over. She's asking about an old application. Tony studied Lena for a second before nodding. Yeah, I think we keep those in the office. You can check the filing cabinet, just don't touch anything else.
Jackpot. Lena kept her expression neutral.
"Sure, thanks."
Tony led her toward the back, past the kitchen, and into a small, windowless office. The filing cabinet sat against the wall, cluttered with stacks of unopened invoices and old promotional posters. The real prize was the computer terminal on the desk.
Tony pointed at the cabinet. Should be in there somewhere. Just knock when you're done.
The moment the door shut behind him, Lena moved fast. She wasn't looking for job applications. She wanted that CCTV footage. She dropped into the chair and wiggled the mouse. The screen lit up, no password required. Lena clicked through the security system, pulling up last night's feed. She fast-forwarded, watching in double speed as Sam worked the counter, laughing with customers. At 8:17 p.m., he took off his apron, grabbed his jacket, and walked toward the exit. Then he stopped. Someone was waiting for him just outside the door. Lena hit pause, then zoomed in. A man, dressed in a dark hoodie, his face obscured by the cafe's awning. He stood completely still, as if he had been waiting for Sam. The footage showed Sam hesitating before stepping outside. The man turned toward him, and though his face was hidden, Lena could see his posture. Confident, controlling, expectant. Sam followed him without a word. Lena fast-forwarded. Sam never came back. Her pulse hammered. She pulled out her phone and recorded the screen, capturing the entire interaction. If something happened to Sam, she wasn't going to let him vanish without a trace. Just as she finished, the office door creaked open. Lena snapped her phone shut and spun in her chair.
Tony stood in the doorway, eyes narrowing. Find what you were looking for.
Chapter 3. The Escape. Lena's heart pounded as she looked up at Tony, forcing a sheepish smile.
Yeah, sorry.
She said, shifting in the chair.
I was actually booking an Uber through the company's link. I ran out of cash and my card got declined this morning. I know it was stupid, but I figured I could pay it back when I get paid next.
She held her breath, watching Tony's reaction. His expression was unreadable, but after a long moment, he exhaled through his nose.
You used the company account for a personal ride?
Lena shrugged, doing her best to look embarrassed.
Yeah, I know, it was dumb. I just panicked.
Tony sighed, rubbing his temples. Look, just don't do it again. I'll have to check the transaction later.
Lena nodded quickly, grabbing the nearest manila folder from the filing cabinet and clutching it as if it had been her real reason for being there.
Thanks, Tony. Seriously, I'll pay it back, I swear.
He gave her a final hard look before gesturing toward the door. Go, and don't touch anything in here again.
She didn't need to be told twice. As soon as she was outside the cafe, she walked quickly to the nearest alleyway, pulling out her phone. Her hands were shaking as she opened Dropbox and uploaded the footage. It took 30 agonizing seconds for the video to finish. Once it was safely stored, she deleted it from her phone's gallery, just in case. Then she exhaled and leaned against the alley wall, trying to process what she had just seen. The facts so far: Sam left the cafe at 8:17 p.m. He met a mysterious hooded man outside. He followed the man without hesitation and never came back. Lena had covered a lot of missing persons cases on her blog, and this was classic abduction behavior. But the weirdest part: why did no one remember Sam? She pulled up the cafe's Instagram page, scrolling through their old photos. There was nothing. No pictures of Sam, no old posts with his name mentioned. It was as if he had never existed. Her stomach twisted. She needed someone else to confirm this. Someone who remembered him. Lena took a deep breath and opened her contacts. She scrolled until she found Jay Patel, another regular at the cafe, someone she had seen chatting with Sam countless times. She sent him a quick text.
Lena, hey, do you remember Sam from the cafe? Tall, curly hair, alien pin on his apron?
The reply came almost instantly.
Who's Sam?
Lena stared at the screen. Her skin prickled with cold. Something was very, very wrong. Chapter 4. The Vanished Life. Lena's fingers trembled as she stared at Jay's text.
Who's Sam?
It didn't make sense. Jay and Sam had been friends. She'd seen them talk every morning. How could he just forget? Her mind raced through possibilities. Gaslighting? A mass memory wipe? A government experiment? Lena had covered enough conspiracy theories to know this wasn't normal. She needed to go deeper. Sam's apartment. She didn't know his exact address, but she had walked with him a few times after closing. He had mentioned living above a small, run-down laundromat about 10 minutes from the cafe. Lena pulled up Google Maps, tracing the route in her mind before setting off. 10 minutes later, Lena stopped in front of the laundromat. Something was wrong. Sam's apartment, the second-floor unit right above the shop, was boarded up. Thick wooden planks covered the door and windows, nailed haphazardly as if done in a hurry. The stairs leading up to the unit were roped off with caution tape. A for lease sign hung lopsided in the laundromat window. Lena's stomach churned. This wasn't possible. Sam had just been here, hadn't he? Her pulse pounded as she approached the laundromat door and peered inside. The interior was dimly lit, with rows of idle washing machines. A bored-looking man sat behind the counter, flipping through a magazine. Lena pushed the door open, the bell jingling overhead.
Laundry's still open, but the dry cleaning's backed up.
I'm actually looking for the guy who lived upstairs. Sam. You know where he went?
Upstairs?
Yeah, Sam lived there. Curly hair barista at the coffee shop down the street.
That apartment's been empty for months.
That's not possible. He was there. I walked with him home last week.
Miss, that place has been empty since before I started working here.
And when was that?
3 months ago.
Her throat went dry. Something was erasing Sam's entire existence. She forced a nervous laugh.
Oh, must have been mistaken.
She turned toward the door, but the man called after her.
Wait.
Lena froze. The laundromat worker stood, rubbing his chin.
You know, you're not the first person to ask about that place.
Who else asked?
A guy came in a few nights ago. Real quiet, dressed in all black. Asked about the apartment too. When I told him it was empty, he just stood there for a second, then left without another word.
Lena's pulse quickened. The hooded man. Had he come back here, looking for her? She swallowed the lump in her throat and forced a smile.
Thanks, let me know if you see him again.
He didn't blink. Then slowly he raised his hand. Lena's stomach turned. He was holding a piece of paper. Scrawled in shaky, desperate handwriting were 3 words. Don't look for me. The tape cut to static. Lena sat frozen. Then the screen flickered again. A new figure appeared. Not Sam, a man in a dark hood. He stood completely still. His face wasn't visible. But then his head turned, like he could see her. Lena's blood ran cold. The tape stopped. The screen went black. Then, behind her, in the silent apartment, a floorboard creaked. Chapter 6. The Warning. Lena's breath hitched. The floorboard creaked again. She didn't dare turn around. Instead, she moved slowly, carefully, silently. Step by step, she backed toward the bathroom. A shadow flickered in the corner of her eye. Someone was in the apartment. Lena reached the bathroom door, slipped inside, and shut it without a sound. She locked it, then turned to the window, small, but she could fit. With trembling fingers, she unlatched it and shoved it open. Cold air rushed in as she climbed onto the sink, swung her legs through the gap, and lowered herself onto the fire escape. Just as she dropped to the metal grating, she heard it. The door to the bathroom slowly creaked open. Lena didn't look back. She ran. The envelope. The next morning, Lena arrived at work feeling like she had been awake for a year. Her blog followers were already buzzing about Sam. She had posted the CCTV footage anonymously the night before, hoping someone might recognize the hooded man. She had barely sat down at her desk when she saw it. An envelope on her keyboard. No name, no markings, just plain white paper. Her stomach twisted. She picked it up with shaky fingers, pulled the flap open, and slid out the single sheet of paper inside. The message was typed. No handwriting.
Hoodie man is Sam's lover.
Lena's pulse pounded. Her first instinct was disbelief. Sam had never mentioned a boyfriend, never hinted at one. But then, it explained everything. The way Sam followed the man so willingly in the CCTV footage, the absence of struggle, the fact that Sam had written, "Don't look for me" on the tape. But that only raised more questions. Why was Sam's entire existence being erased? Why was his apartment abandoned overnight? And most importantly, who had left this note? Chapter 7. The secret past. Lena knew she needed to dig deeper. If Sam's sister knew about his past, she might hold the key to everything. It took some effort, but after scrolling through old social media accounts, she finally found Amanda Calloway, Sam's younger sister. Her account was private, but her profile picture showed her standing beside Sam, confirming she was real. Lena hesitated, then sent her a message.
Hi, Amanda. I don't know if you remember me, but I used to see Sam every day at the café. I need to talk to you about him. It's important.
She didn't expect a quick reply, but Amanda responded within 2 minutes.
Sam?
Lena took a deep breath.
I think he's in trouble. No one remembers him. His apartment is abandoned, and I have a video of him leaving with someone just before he disappeared.
A pause.
Where are you? I'll come to you.
The truth about Simon. An hour later, Amanda sat across from Lena in a dimly lit diner. She was pale, fidgety, and looked like she hadn't slept in days.
I knew something was wrong.
Amanda muttered, stirring her untouched coffee.
Didn't think.
She exhaled sharply.
What did you find?
I know who that is.
Lena hesitated, then pulled out her phone and played the CCTV footage. Amanda watched in silence. When it ended, she looked up, her expression haunted. Lena leaned in.
Who?
His name is Simon. He and Sam, they were together, but it wasn't real.
What do you mean?
Sam was struggling. He never really wanted to be with Simon. It was just a phase, he said. He thought maybe if he tried, if he gave it a shot, he'd figure himself out.
But he didn't.
Lena guessed.
No. It only made things worse. 6 months ago, he told Simon he was done. He wanted to move on, put that part of his life behind him. But Simon, he wouldn't accept it.
Lena felt a chill.
What did he do?
Amanda's hands trembled.
He started blackmailing him.
Lena's breath caught. Simon had photos, texts, things that Sam had sent him in private. Things Sam didn't want anyone to know. He threatened to send them to our parents, to his boss, to anyone who would listen.
Lena's stomach twisted. So Sam paid him off?
Amanda nodded.
At first, but it never ended. Every time he thought he was free, Simon would come back, demanding more. Sam was terrified of him.
Lena's fingers tightened around her phone. If Simon had been stalking Sam, pushing him into a mental corner, what if this wasn't just blackmail anymore? What if Simon had finally decided that if he couldn't have Sam, no one could? Chapter 8. The Man Who Walked Free. Lena barely heard the hum of the city outside as she sat at her laptop, fingers tapping furiously. Simon. If he had blackmailed Sam, what else was he capable of? She ran a background search on him, combing through old news articles, forums, anything that mentioned his name. At first, nothing. Then, she found it. A murder trial. The headline hit her like a punch to the stomach.
Local man acquitted in people trafficker murder case.
She clicked on the article. The case was from 2 years ago. The victim, Ivan Durov, a suspected human trafficker, had been found dead in a warehouse, executed with a single gunshot to the back of the head. Simon had been arrested, suspected of involvement, but the case against him fell apart. Lena scanned the article. Simon had known Ivan, but denied any involvement in his death. No murder weapon was ever found. Witnesses placed Simon near the scene on the night of the murder, but none could confirm he had gone inside. The jury couldn't convict due to lack of evidence. Simon walked free. Lena's stomach twisted. A blackmailer, a manipulator, a man accused of execution-style murder, and he was the last person seen with Sam. She closed her laptop, her pulse hammering. She needed to find Simon. She needed to know what happened to Sam. But something about this felt bigger than just blackmail. Because if Simon had been willing to kill a people trafficker, what had Sam gotten himself into?
Chapter 9. A Bond Built on Secrets. Lena's fingers hovered over her keyboard as she pulled up everything she could on Ivan Durov. The man had been a ghost. There were no clear records of how he had entered the country, no employment history, no family listed, just rumors, and a string of missing persons reports that seemed to lead back to him. Then, she found a court transcript from a human trafficking case 5 years ago. One survivor testified against Ivan. Lena's breath caught as she read the name, Simon Holloway. Her skin prickled as she clicked on the case details. Simon had come into the country as a teenager, undocumented, brought in through back channels, trafficked by Ivan. Lena's stomach twisted as she read the horrifying details. Ivan had run an underground trafficking ring, smuggling vulnerable boys into the UK, using them for sex work. Simon had been one of them, until he escaped. His testimony hadn't been enough to convict Ivan at the time, but Simon had disappeared from the court record afterward. He had vanished from the system, starting a new life. Then, 2 years later, Ivan was executed in an empty warehouse, and Simon had been the prime suspect. Lena exhaled shakily. It was all coming together. Simon had been Ivan's victim. He had gotten free, but not without scars. And then, one way or another, he had taken revenge. But where did Sam fit into all of this? Lena thought back to the VHS tape, to the look in Sam's eyes, to the message.
Don't look for me.
Sam had known. Somewhere in the middle of their relationship, Simon had told him the truth. About his past, his trauma, the murder. Had Sam threatened to go to the police? Had he wanted out and Simon couldn't let him go? Or was something even darker at play? Lena needed to find Simon, and she needed to find him fast.
The next 3 hours, tracking down Simon.
It wasn't easy. He had no social media, no online footprint, but everyone left a trail. She finally found a lead, an old LinkedIn page from years ago listing a youth hostel in East London as a previous employer. It was a long shot, but when she called the hostel and asked if Simon Holloway was still working there, the receptionist answered, "Yeah, he's on night shift." Bingo.
The youth hostel. At 1:15 a.m., Lena pushed open the heavy glass door of the Starlight Hostel. The place smelled of bleach and old carpet, the fluorescent lights casting a dull glow over the worn-out couches in the common area. Behind the reception desk, a man sat watching the CCTV monitors. Simon. He looked older than in the photos she had found. His dark hair was cropped short, his sharp features tired and unreadable. He wore a black hoodie, the same kind he had worn in the CCTV footage. His eyes flicked to her the moment she stepped in. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Simon leaned forward.
"You shouldn't be here,"
he said quietly. Lena swallowed, her throat dry.
Where's Sam?
Simon exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping against the desk.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Don't.
She snapped.
I saw the tape. I know you were the last person to see him. And I know about Ivan.
Simon flinched. That was it, the tell. Lena pressed on.
You told Sam, didn't you? About what happened About Ivan trafficking you, about how he died.
Simon's expression remained unreadable.
You killed him, didn't you?
Lena whispered. Simon didn't move. Then slowly he stood up. Lena tensed, ready to bolt. Simon stepped closer, resting his hands on the counter.
If you care about Sam, walk away,
He said in a low voice. Lena's stomach twisted.
That's not an answer.
She said. Simon studied her for a moment, then glanced toward the security camera in the corner.
You've already gone too far?
He muttered. Lena's pulse thundered. Something was very, very wrong. Before she could press him further, a door creaked open from the hallway behind the desk. Simon's posture stiffened. Lena glanced past him. A man in a suit had just stepped into the room, watching them silently. Simon barely turned his head.
I'll handle it.
The suited man nodded, then disappeared back into the hallway. Lena's blood turned to ice.
What the hell is going on?
She whispered. Simon's jaw clenched. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded note. He pressed it into her hand.
Leave.
He muttered.
Now.
Lena hesitated, but Simon's expression was unreadable. He wasn't threatening her. He was warning her. She turned and walked out of the hostel without another word. As soon as she hit the cold air, she unfolded the note. 4 words. They took him first.
Now she realized Sam hadn't been running from Simon. He had been running from something much bigger, something that had already killed before.
Sam's secret investigation. Lena didn't sleep that night. She spent hours piecing together Sam's last moves. If he had started digging into Ivan, there had to be a trail. She hacked into Sam's old email account, something she had picked up over the years from running her conspiracy blog. It wasn't exactly legal, but at this point, neither was whatever had happened to Sam. After several failed password attempts, she finally cracked it. Sam's last emails made her stomach turn. A thread titled,
Something bigger than Ivan, I need to talk.
Sent to an unknown recipient. A response.
Drop it or you'll end up like him.
The final email never sent.
I know who's at the top. We need to go to the police. I think I'm being followed.
Lena's hands shook as she scrolled. Attached to the last draft email was a document. She opened it. It was a list of names, politicians, police officers, business owners, names that didn't belong together unless they were all tied to the same thing. Human trafficking. Ivan had only been a spoke in the wheel. Sam had found the head of the entire operation. And then, he had disappeared.
Lena covered her mouth with her hand, fighting the wave of nausea rising in her throat. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about powerful people protecting themselves.
The first major clue, Lena scrolled further, scanning Sam's last internet searches. Then she saw it. A flight booking. Sam had been planning to leave the country the day after he disappeared. One-way ticket. No return. But he had never gotten on that flight. Lena's heart pounded. Had they found out he was trying to run? She needed proof. She needed to go to the police. But if what she had just found was true, could she trust them? Chapter 12. The Name in the Shadows. Lena stormed back to Starlight Hostel, her fists clenched. Simon's warning had rattled her, but she wasn't leaving without answers. She pushed through the doors and found Simon waiting for her, as if he had known she'd come back.
You're persistent, he muttered, arms crossed.
You know why I'm here, Lena shot back.
Simon exhaled slowly, rubbing his jaw. He looked exhausted.
Sam found something he shouldn't have, Lena pressed. And now he's missing. If you know who's behind this, you have to tell me.
Simon hesitated. His fingers tapped against the desk, a nervous tick. Then finally he spoke.
I didn't know at first, Simon admitted, his voice low. I thought it was just Ivan. I thought it ended with him. But Sam, he kept digging. And when he finally figured out who was behind it all...
He stopped. His jaw tightened.
Lena's pulse hammered. Who is it?
Simon hesitated, then finally he said it.
Tony Kingston.
Lena froze. Her brain refused to process it for a second. She blinked.
Tony? She repeated like she had misheard.
Simon nodded. The weight of it crashed over her. Tony Kingston, the manager of the café, the man who had hired her, paid her, watched her work every single day, the man who had stood right in front of her when she asked about Sam, the man who had let her into his office, smiled at her, acted like nothing was wrong. It felt impossible. Tony? Her boss? A human trafficking kingpin?
You're lying, she whispered, but her voice wasn't sure.
Simon shook his head.
The truth sinks in. Lena felt numb. She thought back to the CCTV footage. How Sam had left the cafe, how no one had remembered him. Tony had been there that day. He had watched her snoop around, let her into the office. Had she been playing right into his hands?
You shouldn't have come back, Simon muttered. If he finds out, you know.
Lena's hands shook. She had worked under a monster this whole time. Had he been watching her, waiting for her to get too close? And if he had been willing to erase Sam, was she next?
Nowhere to run. Lena thought about running, disappearing. But Sam had run, and they got to him anyway. Besides, she didn't have enough evidence to go to the police. Even if she did, who could she trust? The list Sam had found included police officers, politicians, high-ranking officials. For all she knew, Tony had people inside the system, which left only one option. She had to expose him publicly, and she knew exactly who could help.
Channel 4 News. Lena sat in a dimly lit pub in Shoreditch, nervously stirring a drink she had no intention of finishing. Across from her sat Dan Ellis, an investigative journalist for Channel 4 News, and her ex. Dan had been her biggest heartbreak. But right now, none of that mattered.
He studied her over his pint. Jesus, Lena, when you said you had a story, I didn't think you meant this.
It's real, she said firmly.
Dan exhaled, rubbing his chin. You're telling me your cafe manager is running a human trafficking ring? That he had one of his employees erased because he got too close? Lena's fingers tightened around her glass.
Yes, she said, and if he thinks I know, I'm next.
Dan leaned back, studying her. He wasn't dismissing her, but she knew he needed proof.
What do you need from me? He finally asked.
Lena swallowed hard. A micro body cam. Something I can hide in my uniform. I need to stream and record every interaction I have with Tony. Dan raised an eyebrow.
You're going back to work?
I don't have a choice, she said. If I suddenly disappear, Tony will know I'm onto him, and then I'm dead anyway.
Dan sighed.
You realize how dangerous this is?
Lena nodded. But what she didn't say, what she didn't even want to think, was that it might already be too late.
Equipped for war, Dan met her in a quiet alleyway the next morning, handing her a tiny, high-definition micro body cam.
Press this once to start recording, twice to stream live. If anything happens, I'll see it in real time.
Lena tucked it into the seam of her apron. She had one shot at this. She had to bait Tony into revealing something, anything, that could bring him down. Because if she failed, she wouldn't walk out of that cafe alive. Chapter 14. The Trap Closes. Lena had never been more aware of her own heartbeat. She had walked into the cafe that morning, pretending nothing was wrong. But the moment she stepped inside, she felt it. Tony was watching her. His eyes flicked up when she entered, his usual fake warmth replaced by something colder. Calculating. He was testing her, waiting for her to make a mistake. She forced herself to smile, moving behind the counter as if this were just another shift. Then Tony spoke.
Hey, Lena, everything work out with that Uber?
Lena's blood turned to ice. Her mind raced. She had prepared for this. She gave a small, nervous chuckle and lied.
Oh, yeah. Turns out I had some cash in my purse after all. Paid the driver directly so it wouldn't show on the company account.
She kept her voice light, normal. Tony didn't blink, then he smiled. A slow, eerie smile.
But that's not what happened, is it?
Lena felt her stomach drop. Tony knew. He wasn't guessing. He knew. Somehow he had proof. Somehow she had already lost. Her mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But if she ran, she'd never make it out the door. She had seconds to act. This needs to be on the sidewalk,
she said, voice light, normal.
Then, without waiting for a response, she turned and walked straight out the door. Outside the cafe, the moment her foot hit the pavement, she felt it, a shift in the air. She didn't look back. She didn't stop. She walked to the corner of the street, pretending to scan for a good spot to place the board. Then, in one fluid motion, she dropped it and ran. She heard the cafe door swing open behind her. She didn't look. She turned a sharp corner, weaving into the crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was alive, but not safe. Tony knew she had been in his office. He knew she had lied, and now he would be hunting her. The next move, Lena ducked into a narrow alleyway, pressing her back against the cold brick. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, tapping twice on the hidden micro body cam. Live stream activated. Dan at Channel 4 was watching now. She sucked in a breath and typed a message.
I'm compromised. Meet now.
Her phone buzzed almost instantly.
Where?
She exhaled. Somewhere public, somewhere Tony couldn't touch her. She typed,
King's Cross, 20 minutes.
She took a deep breath, steadied herself, and stepped back onto the street. She had one shot at bringing Tony down. And she was out of time. Chapter 16, The Ultimatum. Lena arrived at King's Cross Station, weaving through the crowds, her pulse pounding. She spotted Dan near the pret-a-manger, standing with his hands in his pockets, eyes scanning for her. As soon as she reached him, she could tell something was wrong. Dan's face was pale, his jaw clenched.
Lena, he said, voice tight, we need to talk.
Lena felt her stomach drop.
What happened?
Dan exhaled sharply and pulled out his phone.
I got a call, he said, from Tony.
Lena's breath hitched. Tony had called Dan. Dan looked at her, his expression dark.
He knows. He knows you know everything, and he has a deal for you.
Lena's hands trembled. What kind of deal? Dan hesitated. Then finally he said it.
He wants you to write a confession.
Lena's chest tightened.
A confession for what?
Dan's voice was grim.
Saying that you and Sam killed Ivan.
Lena's world tilted. She stared at Dan, unblinking. He said if you write the letter,
Dan continued,
he'll make sure you and Sam see daylight again. Otherwise, Dan didn't need to finish the sentence. Otherwise, Sam was as good as dead. And maybe she was too. The trap. Lena's mind raced. Tony wasn't just covering up his crimes. He was flipping the narrative. If she signed that letter, she and Sam would take the fall for Ivan's murder. Tony would keep it as leverage, using it to silence them forever. And even if she did sign it, who was to say Tony would let them live?
And if I refuse?
Dan's jaw tightened.
He said, and I quote, then Sam disappears for good and Lena follows.
Lena's fingers curled into fists. She had come too far to roll over and let Tony win. She needed to find a way to turn this against him. To get Sam back, to take Tony down, and she needed to do it fast. Chapter 17, Setting the Trap. Lena knew she was walking into a death sentence. Tony wasn't the type to leave loose ends. But if this was her only chance to see Sam alive, she had to play along. And she had to outplay him. The setup. She met Dan at his flat in Shoreditch, where he handed her a new micro-streaming camera.
This one's better, Dan said. High-res encrypted and streams directly to me, my team at Channel 4 and the police.
Lena took it, securing it in her necklace pendant, one of the few places Tony wouldn't think to check.
Are you sure the police will back this? She asked, voice low.
Dan nodded. I called in a favor. They won't move without proof, but they'll be watching the live stream from a block away. The second Tony incriminates himself, they move in.
Lena exhaled. This was it. She was about to walk into the lion's den. And she had one shot to get it right. The meeting. Tony had chosen an abandoned warehouse in the Docklands. Classic, isolated, a place where bodies disappeared. Lena pulled up in a cab, stepping out into the cold night air. The warehouse loomed ahead, its rusted metal siding illuminated by a single flickering light. She spotted Tony standing by the entrance. Two men in suits flanked him, hired muscle. And then her breath hitched. They were dragging someone out of a van. Sam. His face was pale, his wrists bound, but he was alive. Lena forced herself to stay calm. She walked forward.
Tony smiled as if they were business associates, not predator and prey. Lena, he said smoothly, glad you could make it.
She kept her voice steady.
Let's just get this over with.
Tony gestured to a makeshift table and chair inside the warehouse. A piece of paper and a pen sat neatly on top. The confession. Lena moved toward it, sitting down.
Sam goes free the second I sign.
Tony gave her a mock, sympathetic smile.
Of course, I'm a man of my word.
Lena fought the urge to laugh in his face. She picked up the pen, pretending to hesitate.
How do I know you won't just kill us both after this?
Tony chuckled.
You don't.
That was it. The confession Tony never expected to be recorded. The trap springs. Lena clicked the pen twice. It wasn't just a nervous tick. It was the prearranged signal. 1 block away, undercover officers watching the live feed saw everything. Within seconds, sirens split the night. Tony's smug expression collapsed. Blue and red lights flashed as unmarked police vehicles skidded to a stop outside the warehouse. Armed police, a voice boomed. Drop your weapons. Get on the ground. Tony's bodyguards reached for their guns. Bad idea. Within seconds, they were pinned to the ground, cuffs snapping shut. Lena turned back to Tony.
You played me? He hissed.
Yeah, and it's all on tape.
Tony lunged, but before he could reach her, officers tackled him to the ground. Sam staggered forward, wrists still bound, eyes wide with shock.
Lena rasped.
She was already at his side, tearing off the rope.
You're okay.
She whispered. You're okay.
For the first time in weeks, Sam was free. And Tony Kingston. He wasn't walking away from this. Epilogue: A New Dawn. The footage went public within 24 hours. Tony's entire trafficking ring was exposed. His ties to powerful figures were ripped apart, his name plastered across every headline in the country. Sam testified, so did Simon. It wasn't easy. The damage Tony had done could never be undone. But justice had finally found him. And Lena?
She wrote the biggest story of her life. Not just about Tony, not just about Sam, but about the silent victims, people like Simon, like countless others, who had been forced into the shadows for too long.
Her blog became something more.
A voice for the unheard, a warning for those who thought monsters like Tony could stay hidden forever. Because she had learned something in all of this. Evil thrives in silence, and as long as she had a voice, she'd never let that silence win again.
The end.